2010 at the earliest. But what's looming ahead? The November 2010 midterm elections in Congress. And we all know elections, you know, you're not going to see major, bold reform efforts as you get closer and closer to these elections. So that leads us back to inaction by the federal government on comprehensive immigration reform. And what does that mean? Well, what we've seen at the state level, and if you look back from 2005 to this year, is a steady increase in the number of bills dealing with immigrants introduced in our state legislatures. And so in 2005 you had, and this was around the time of the Sensenbrenner bill, you had 300 bills introduced in all 50 legislatures around the United States on immigration. And some of these are good bills, some of these might be bad bills. I'm using statistics maintained by the National Conference of State Legislatures. They include not just bills, but also resolutions in their numbers. So it's a little bit skewed, but I think for purposes of just understanding the increase in volume of activity at the state level, this is helpful. By 2006, again, Congress didn't act on immigration reform, and you saw a doubling in the number of bills introduced. Not a huge increase in the numbers actually enacted. By 2007 is when you really saw the peak. It tripled to over 1,500 bills were introduced in state legislatures around the country. So you can imagine the affiliate in Utah and how busy it became trying to track the legislation that they were seeing here in Salt Lake City. And there was an increase again in the number of bills enacted as well. 2008, a slight dip, but that might also be attributable to the fact that not every state legislature meets every year, and so that was an odd year where some didn't meet. In 2009, as of June 30th, it looks like we're already back up, edging up a little bit. As of June 30th, and legislative sessions hadn't ended yet, you already had 1,400 bills introduced around the country, with 285 of them already passed by state legislatures. So what are the contributing factors to this? We've talked about inaction at the federal level and the death of comprehensive immigration reform delay in it. I think also a lot of it is obviously due to the struggling economy and the scapegoating of immigrants that we have seen historically, and we're seeing again in terms of blaming immigrants for a lot of the problems of our society and finding ways to kind of curtail their integration and involvement, and running them out of town. Obviously, political scapegoating is a critical part of this, and you can see, if you looked at the last graph, you saw how many bills were introduced, but how few of them were actually enacted. And that's because a lot of lawmakers around the country have kind of started introducing bills for the sake of rallying and mobilizing their base, knowing that those bills aren't actually going to become law, but kind of throwing red meat to their interest groups. And then the other thing you've really seen is a coordinated effort by anti-immigrant groups to really work with a network of state lawmakers around the country to introduce these bills. So, the bills that you see are often, there's nothing innovative about them. They're really copycat measures of things that you've seen in various other states, and members just kind of share the same type of bill and introduce it in the next state. So in terms of the major issue areas, there's so many of them, and I'm not going to talk about all these today, but some of them to keep in mind, and I'll let you read the list here, are what we call the omnibus bills. These are bills that contain all kinds of provisions dealing with various issues here, everything but the kitchen sink. And then you have bills that deal with specific aspects of immigration enforcement. So employer sanctions has been a critical issue that we've seen around the country, embroiling law enforcement and state criminal courts in trying to determine what people's immigration status is and then taking some kind of action against them. Because there is no criminalization of undocumented presence in the United States, we've seen a lot of efforts at the state level to kind of create that criminalization in creative ways. harboring and transporting, verification of people's status, restricting their ability to housing, restricting the ability to attend college and university, English language restrictions. So let me just show you a little bit of the mapping of where this all is happening. So Utah is one of 5 states in the country that has passed one of the omnibus bills. Oklahoma was the, actually Georgia enacted it first, but Oklahoma's really became the model that a lot of other states copied, including Utah. And so that was SB 81, which was enacted in Utah in 2008. It went into effect. It was delayed a little bit because the legislature decided to take a look at what they had just enacted, and there were a few minimal reforms to it, but implementation was delayed till July 1 of this year. So it's just gone into effect, and I think there's still a lot that's not known about what implementation is going to look like in this state. With the most popular type of reform has been looking at employers and what we call the E-Verify program. So Congress enacted a program, an experimental voluntary program where employers could start using this electronic database to run checks on the status of new hires, people that they've just hired. And that was originally called the Basic Pilot Program because that's what it was, a pilot program. And it was recently, the name was changed to E-Verify because they really wanted to transition from the pilot stage. But the problem is they haven't really satisfied all the defects and problems with those electronic databases. So you still have a lot of inaccuracy in those databases, and actually non-citizens and people who've naturalized are more likely to be wrongfully determined to not have immigration work authorization status, and that's been a real problem. Yet states have looked to try to mandate employers to enroll in the E-Verify program. And so Utah is one of the states that has mandated use of E-Verify. In Utah, the mandate is on public employers and people who have public contracts with the government. It hasn't been expanded universally. But that is something that has happened in Arizona, which I'll talk about soon. And then laws mandating local and state immigration enforcement in the criminal justice system. I kind of use this broad categorization here. What I mean is really laws that are mandating that state correctional officials at the local jails, county jails, start trying to figure out what people's immigration status is. Now this is really problematic because immigration is very complex, and without the proper training or understanding of the immigration laws, which are more complicated than the tax code, you can't really expect local officers in the jails to be able to figure out what someone's immigration status is. Yet this is something that's being mandated, and we have a lot of concerns about the effects of that. The other thing that falls in this category is some states have looked to requiring state criminal judges to make determinations about people's immigration status, and then set bail based on that status. So Utah is one of those places, and here there's a presumption against bail if a state court judge thinks that you're undocumented. So this is, I mean, the ACLU's position is that the only competent body to determine someone's immigration status is a federal immigration judge, which is part of this administrative system set for immigration enforcement in the United States. And then I had mentioned to you that because Congress failed to criminalize undocumented immigrants, there have been some efforts to try to criminalize this population in unique ways. And so one of them has been passing identity theft laws that rather than looking at who's stealing someone's